Coming from London, the brand new revised Peter Ross Show.
It's the time of the season for love.
Welcome, Colin Blunstone. Welcome, Colin. Hi, how are you today?
I'm very well, Peter. Great to talk to you.
We've got a load of questions from people all over the world to ask you all these questions, and we'll get to those in just a moment. How old were you when you first joined the Zombies?
Well, the Zombies actually started in 1961, and I was 15 when I first joined the band. When we recorded She's Not There, our first record, I was 18, and when it was released, I think I was just 19. So, I mean, we were all very, very young, and of course it was very exciting and a great adventure for, teenagers to get involved.
Rebecca in Holland asks, was there anybody in your family that had a musical background?
Well, it's funny because for years I sort of thought there probably wasn't. My mum and dad never really showed a musical side when I was growing up. But then when I think back, I'm completely wrong. My mother was a dancer when she was younger, and she used to be a really good singer as well. And for some reason, we didn't listen to a lot of music. But in the family, there were a lot of performing musicians. My mother was a good singer, a very good dancer, and she had 5 brothers who were all musicians. I don't think any of them ever became... No, one was a professional musician, but the rest were all very, very accomplished musicians, and they could all play 3 or 4 instruments. So when I think back to when I was really young, sort of before I was about 10 or 11, I spent a lot of time with my mother's family, and all her brothers played instruments, and one of her sisters, she had 3 sisters, it was a very big family. So yes, on my mother's side, it was very musical.
When you look back at your early days, particularly in the Zombies, who were the people that were influencing you?
I think that when we were first playing, it was all the great American early rock gods, I don't know what you call them, starting with early Elvis, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Bo Diddley, these kind of people were the people that really influenced us. And then I remember later on when we very first heard records from the Beatles, and in fact we, as a band, we went and saw the Stones play before they'd ever had a hit record, and I think that was one of the best concerts I ever saw. But I think from about 63, when we heard the Beatles play, they were a huge influence on us.
The success of She's Not There in 1964, did that change your life completely?
Oh, absolutely. I'd left school with no real idea of what I wanted to do, and I just took a job for a few months. I didn't dare think that we could actually be a professional band. All the time we'd been building up a local following, but it just seemed such a distant thing to think that I could be part of a professional band. It's just not something that happened, certainly not in those days. I'm sure even today a lot of local bands would think that they could never become a professional band touring the world. It just seems such an unlikely thing to happen. I've forgotten what the question was now. Did it change my life completely? Yes.
Did it change it? Yeah. Did it change your life completely?
Absolutely. So I was working in a big office in London, and we won a big sort of rock competition, and that's when I first dared to think, maybe there's a chance that we could become a professional band. And about the same time, we got introduced to a record producer who got us a record deal, and it all seemed to fall into place.
Who was the record producer?
He was called Ken Jones, and he got us a deal with Decca Records, and it was just for a single to start with, I think. But I remember a conversation we had with him where he said, guys, we've got a recording session at Decca in a couple of weeks' time. You could always write something for this session. And then he went on to talk about something else. So it didn't make any impression on me at all, because I always considered that people who wrote songs were sort of a completely different profession, almost a different breed to people who performed on stage. Of course, the Beatles changed everyone's idea of that because they wrote their own songs. But it was unusual in those days. There was songwriters, and then there were performers and bands who performed the songs written by songwriters. Anyway, Rod Argent and Chris White went away
Yeah.
and wrote 2 songs.
Yeah.
And Rod wrote She's Not There, which went on to sell 1 million copies and went to #1 in America.
Well, no one told me about her.
When you look at recording back in 1964 and then recording now in 2000, you know, what are the main differences that you find?
Well, I mean, it's just changed out of all recognition. Of course, all recording now is done digitally, and so you've got as many tracks as you want. So it means you can just record, you know, your voice, and then you can double track it, and you can put as many harmonies as you want on it. You know, you can go on ad infinitum.
Yeah.
But in 1964, everything was recorded on 4 tracks, and so it meant that we would record bass and drums on one track, keyboards and guitars on another track, lead vocal would be on a track on its own, and backing vocals would be on another track. And so we were a bit limited in what we could do. Of course, now you can tune everything. You can change the tempo of anything. You can. The wonderful thing is you can do anything you want once something's recorded. The downside is you've got so many choices now that everything takes so much longer because people want to try different reverbs, different effects on everything. What you couldn't do that in those days. You more or less recorded live.
Do you prefer recording or performing live?
I tell you, I put it a slightly different way. What I really like to do is to write a song so that I'm there right at the initial spark when you get this very first idea of a song, and then see it through until it's recorded, and then to go out and play it live.
What's your favourite song that you've written?
I tell you a song I really like. It was actually on the last Zombies album. It's called Any Other Way, and I like it because it's got quite a Latin feel, and it's got lots of chords in it. And in actual fact, I'm a fairly limited guitarist, but somehow these chords came from somewhere, and I feel quite proud when I hear that song because it's quite a sophisticated chord progression in the song, and the lyrics are quite sort of heartfelt and came quite quickly, and I think they make sense on many different levels.
Still remember seeing you standing there. If there was any other way, don't you think I would have found it by now? Found a way round it somehow. If there was any other way.
Jenny from Scandinavia asks, what are the influences of today when you're writing a song?
I wouldn't say I've got a terrific sort of influence today. I prefer to write lyrics from real events that have happened to me. It might not be actually literal, but the idea comes from things that have happened to me, sometimes a long way in the past. It doesn't have to have happened today. And the music, I just play for hours and hours and hours until something comes. If there's been one big influence in my writing, it's an old friend of mine who sadly passed away, you know, when he was about 50. A singer-songwriter called Duncan Brown, and if people are familiar with the name, then they'll know he wrote many, many wonderful songs. He recorded 6 or 7 albums, I think. I shared a flat with him at one time,
Right.
and he really encouraged me to write. He was a wonderful guitarist, and if you haven't heard any Duncan Brown albums or any Duncan Brown songs, I do really recommend them to you, and he certainly helped me in my early days of writing.
The last hit from the Zombies was 1965, and then there seems to be a bit of a break between that and 72. Did you join Argent straight from the Zombies, or what actually happened?
Well, what happened is quite strange. We didn't have that many hits in the UK. Really, you can make an argument for either one or two. She's Not There was quite a big hit. I think it got to about number 11 or something like that. And then Tell Her No probably just crept into the top 30, depending on what chart you look at.
Yeah.
But our biggest hit was a song called Time of the Season, which was never a hit in the UK, but it was the biggest hit we had around the world. It's so interesting to me that the music business is an international business. The Zombies' last hit was a song called Time of the Season, and it was actually a hit about 18 months after the band finished playing.
Right.
And there was talk of possibly the band getting back together again, but by then Rod Argent and Chris White were committed to their new band, Argent. Rod and Chris were co-producers, and they both wrote for the band, although Chris White was never in the band. He decided he didn't want to play anymore. He was
Right.
the bass player.
Right.
They were committed to that, and in the end, they ended up producing me as a solo artist, and I think my first album was about 1970, and it's called 1 Year.
Right.
And most of Argent played on 1 Year and my next album, Ennismore.
Yeah.
And so that would be Rod Argent, Russ Ballard, who I know you spoke to quite recently in
Yeah.
one of your programs.
Yeah.
Wonderful performer and great writer. Jim Rodford and Bob Henry. That was the lineup for Argent. And they played on my first two albums.
Say You Don't Mind, in 1972, got to number 15 in the UK charts. It was written by Denny Lane, of course,
Yes.
who went on to work with Paul McCartney. What was your first impression when you heard that song, first of all?
Well, I first heard it when Denny Lane recorded it, which I think was in the late 60s, because the Zombies, the original Zombies, loved that song, and we used to close our act on Say You Don't Mind, and
Right.
that's how I knew the song
Yeah.
when we came to record it on my first solo album. But we tried to record it in much the same way as Denny Lane had recorded it, sort of a bit more rocky, and it didn't work. In fact, Argent weren't available for that session, so we were using session musicians, and it just didn't work. And someone, and we've argued about this for hours on end over the years, came up with the idea of using strings instead of the normal lineup of a band. And we were introduced to a wonderful arranger called Chris Gunning.
Yeah, yeah.
And he put a 21-piece string orchestra together,
Right.
and came up with this just wonderful string arrangement for that song. And it was a huge shock to me when I heard it. And I have to say, although I loved it, I didn't realize it had any commercial potential. It was just so unlike anything that was around at the time.
Well, that's similar to I Don't Believe in Miracles, because he did the same arrangements for that as well, didn't he?
He did do the strings on that.
And so those two songs, I mean, whenever you hear those two songs, you come to mind straight away.
I realize that I've been in your eyes some kind of fool.
I was listening the other day to I Don't Believe in Miracles,
Yeah.
and it's one of those songs that just gets into your head, and it seems to sort of constantly play itself in your head. When you perform this song, do you think about the lyrics, or what goes through your head? You know, when you start to sing songs like these, like I Don't Believe in Miracles.
Well, I think, can I say first of all that Russ Ballard wrote I Don't Believe in Miracles, and I can remember very well going round to his house, and he just sat down and played it at the piano, and so I heard it in a very natural form. I didn't listen to it through a recording. He actually played it to me, and I loved it. And where with Say You Don't Mind, I didn't realise the commercial potential of that one, but I think with I Don't Believe in Miracles, I did. I thought that was a very commercial song. But I always try and think very carefully about what I'm singing, and hopefully that comes over in the performance. I think it's really important that you're thinking about the meaning of the words that you're singing, but it's equally important that you phrase it correctly. You've got to be ever so careful that you don't get too wound up with the meaning of the lyric, and then you forget the phrasing. I think when I was younger, I was a bit prone to that, but it's one thing that I've learned over the years.
Most of these questions are from listeners all around the world, Colin.
Right.
Colin, so we go to the Zombies in the 1960s, we go to Argent, then at the beginning of the 70s, 72, 73, 74, you've got success on your own. There was a bit in between where you went back to a normal job, I understand.
I did, because it's probably difficult for people to comprehend this, but at the end of the Zombies, say 67, the two writers had got a completely separate income stream coming in from writing. I'd written a couple of songs for the Zombies, but they'd written all the important songs, and obviously they'd written, I don't know, 100 songs each, I'm not quite sure. And so, from a financial point of view, the two writers, Rod Argent and Chris White, were quite comfortably off. But the three non-writers found themselves, with the band finishing, and in a very precarious financial situation. And all three of us literally had to get a job very quickly as well. Paul Atkinson went into a computer firm. Hugh Grundy, our drummer, was selling cars. And I again went back to the old employment agency. I just phoned up and said, have you got any jobs? And they had a job in a big insurance firm in London. And I went down, and I think I worked there for the best part of a year. I quite enjoyed it because it took my mind off the sadness of the band finishing. I found it quite traumatic, really. It was it's like you're losing a part of your life, and at the time I thought I would never get that back again. And so I was quite happy to join a very busy firm who, they kept me on the run. I was on the phone all the time. I didn't have time to dwell on the sadness of the band finishing.
Well, where were you doing most of the recording for the songs? Were you doing them in Abbey Road?
We recorded with the Zombies.
Yeah.
We recorded mostly in one of two studios. The early recordings were in Decca Studios in West Hampstead, but those studios don't exist anymore. And then the last album was recorded in Abbey Road. Yeah.
Yeah. So the connection of Abbey Road then goes on to the Alan Parsons project, which I remember playing that record on the radio many years ago, about 1983, I think. Old and Wise.
Yeah.
So how did you manage to meet both the lawyer and the engineer?
Well, I met Alan Parsons because he was an engineer at Abbey Road, and he worked on the last Zombies album, Odyssey and Oracle. So in the first place, I met him in the studio, but I also realized he lived very close to me as well.
Right.
And we would sometimes meet for a pint on a Saturday morning in the Flask, it's a pub in Hampstead Village. I think the track people know best is from an Alan Parsons album called Eye in the Sky, and the track that I sang is called Old and Wise.
As far as my eyes can see, not mine.
What's your favourite track off your new album here?
Off my new album, that's an interesting thought. I like, you know what, I like most of it. But then I had a big say in choosing the song.
Yeah, well, I can't play them all, Colin.
No, oh, you want me to choose one?
Yeah.
Let me think. I quite like So Much More, and also I think that's going to be a single in Holland. So for anyone who's listening to the program in Holland, I think that So Much More is going to be a single in the new year. So it'd be great if you could play that.
Where's the best place to find out where you're going to be?
Well, I think I've got my own website.
Okay.
It's colinblunstone.co.uk, or you can just Google me, or else the Zombies website, especially if you particularly want to see the Zombies. Obviously, they've got their own website, and details of all their concerts are on there.
Well, I'm coming to see you. I really look forward to that. Thank you so much, Colin Blunstone, for being on the show today.
Peter, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show.
I just want to love you so much more than you.